guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be talking about a book that has made me cry so many happy and sad tears at the same time, and I absolutely loved it, and that is the ebook for A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir. It is a high fantasy story that deals kind of with some Roman-esque aspects. So the events of this story take place just after the events of An Ember in the Ashes, and this is where Laia and Elias, the two main characters, are on their way to Koch prison, where they are trying to help Laia's older brother Darren escape from, but they really have no idea as to how they're going to get him out of there, and they have no idea for what lies ahead of them on this journey to Koch prison. This story also does delve into the perspective of Helene, who is now what is called the Blood Strike, or essentially the second in command in the Empire, and who was formerly Elias's best friend, as she has to now go and hunt him as he is considered a fugitive that is wanted for an execution. This story deals so much with lies and deceit and all kinds of problems when it comes to loving somebody but having to break apart from them, or having to do things despite the fact that you love someone so much. It deals with so much heartbreak and sadness, but there are so many great parts of the story that even though they're sad, you really appreciate how sad they are and understand the gravity of the situation that comes in these situations that are presented in this story. So the thing that I really enjoyed the most about this second installment in the series in particular is that this isn't so much based on the political aspect as the first book was, and in this book we get a lot more focus on some of the more magical elements that are involved in this story. And the really interesting thing about this is that magic in this world seems to be kind of on the down low. Like, people kind of think that there used to be magic, but some people think that it's just completely gone now. But more and more as the story goes on, you see that there are more kind of supernatural and fantastical elements that are at play in this story. There's a lot of confusion as to what exactly the magic is and what it does. I really like that because although it is confusing to understand, it's also confusing for the characters. Like, they have no idea how this stuff works, which if they were to know about it and it was confusing to the reader, then there would be a problem. But because the characters don't quite understand what the magic is and what it is doing and what is its purpose, that makes it more enticing. This leads so much to the idea that there can be so much more magic involved in both the third and the fourth book in this series, and gives more of an opportunity for there to be explanations later on for these characters so that maybe they can understand a little bit more as to how the magic plays into this, if at all, because there is a possibility that this magic really is just kind of coincidental, and I hope that it's not that case, but I do hope to see that the magic is talked about more in the story, as at the moment it's kind of like starting to surface, but there's not really any clear indication of what it is doing and what it is purposed for. The other great thing about the fact that this book was so much more focused on the magic aspect as opposed to the politics that was involved in book one is that it makes the story so much more rounded out. It feels more like an actual fantasy realm, a place of actual fantasy elements that we didn't really get so much of in the first book. It seemed like in the first book it was more politics heavy, and that worked because it honestly helped to set up the politics, which would have been continued on in the second book, which did continue on in the second book, that was set up really well. And the magic was kind of talked about a little bit in book one, but in book two, now that it's being more developed, it's making it this world more interesting and making it more of a real fantasy-esque place, as opposed to it being kind of more mundane and more kind of like actually being in a place like Rome, for instance. There are also two love triangles that are involved in this story that are continued into the story of the second book, which I really loved. I am so salty though about something that was revealed towards the end of the book regarding one of the love triangles, but despite that fact, I really enjoyed the love triangles a lot in this story because I felt that they were not only really organic, but they developed so much more in terms of what the feelings were for each other between characters, and I feel like you just fall in love with the relationship for different reasons, for all the different relationships that are involved in the story. You fall in love with each of them for very different reasons, and it just makes your heart break to see some things happen and some things not happen, but as a fangirl, that's kind of how things work. I really also enjoyed the pacing of this story. I think that the low points that were involved in the story actually were done well because you still felt this real sense of unease throughout the lull points. Like, there really didn't seem to be many lull points, if at all, because any of the places that had lull points just felt so tension-filled, and you didn't know what was going to happen on the next page. Like, you were just waiting to see what else was going to pop up to make the story even more disastrous. There were also some really great plot twists going into that, you know, with the suspense that was built up through these lull points. So many great things that kind of popped up that you're just like, what? Like, I remember at one point, regarding what I said earlier about the relationship, one of the love triangles that was discussed, there was a plot twist regarding one of the relationships that I was just like, what the actual hell is going on? Like, I was so shook by it. I didn't know how to process it, and I had to set the book down for a good 10 minutes and be like, what the hell's going on? I don't know what to think. The ending of this book, oh my god, absolutely destroyed me. I cried so much after reading the end of this book. Both happy and sad is the thing. Like, I was really happy for a lot of good things, but I was also really, really sad because I know that the next book is going to break my heart so much, and I'm not prepared for it, but I am also kind of prepared for it because I know it's going to happen, but I don't want it to happen. I just can't. I loved this book so much, mostly because of the ending, but I think that everything leading up to the ending really, really made this story so incredible, and I cannot wait to be able to read A Reaper at the Gates later on because of the way this story was developed and how it is also set up so much for the third and then the final book in the series. So as far as character growth, now, the character that I think grew the least was Elias, but there's a huge but there because I was actually okay with it. He doesn't exactly grow much as a person in terms of his personality changing, but he does end up finding out a lot of stuff about kind of what he is destined for, and through that he kind of grows. But I will say he does become a little bit less stubborn towards the end of the book, because in the first book and a large majority of this book, he's very stubborn. He wants to have things done his way. He thinks that he knows what's best, and he doesn't really want to work with anyone. He wants to do things on his own, in his own way. But by the end of this book, he actually does grow a lot in that regard, and he starts to kind of let people in a little bit at a time, and I really enjoy that. But I think other than that, he doesn't really change, and given what he goes through in this novel, it makes a little bit of sense as to why he doesn't grow, because he grows in a way that I think is not what I think people would typically think of as growth. The person I think, though, on the opposite side of that spectrum that grew the most was definitely Laia. Laia grew so much in the first book, just right off the bat, and in this book continued to be a complete female badass. I just adored her, and I really, really loved a lot of the strength that she grew into as the story went on, even towards the end of it. She became so much more in control of herself, and she really has grown as not just physically in terms of her combat skills, but mentally. She really starts to understand kind of how strong of an individual she is, and she really understands how much of a good person she is despite all of this evil that is in the world. And the thing about Helene, since this is our other main perspective of the story, is that I really enjoy this, and I almost kind of wish we would have had her perspective in the first book, but I understand why it couldn't have been in the first book, because it would have been a huge distraction to the main story. I think, though, incorporating her into this book was really well done, because you got to see the cracks in her armor as she was going on trying to find Elias and trying to find out why he is with Laia and all of these things, but you really see a lot of the insecurities that she's developed because of the things that happened in the first book and things that kind of transpire for her in this book in terms of her family and how she is now a blood strike and kind of what comes with that, and having to kind of battle against the commandant in a little bit of a way. It's just it's really interesting to see kind of a different perspective of the story from this character who I really, really enjoyed seeing in the first book and wish I would have gotten a perspective from, that I'm glad that we have it now, because at least in that way, we see how everything has affected her at this point, and then how things kind of work for her throughout the rest of the book. And I can't wait to see if she continues in the books 3 and 4, because I think that there's a lot, especially after what happened at the end of this book, that she needs to learn how to do. So overall, if you guys couldn't tell by how much I've been fangirling about different aspects of this book, I ended up giving A Torch Against the Night 5 out of 5 stars. I truly enjoyed it from beginning to end. I flew through the book so quickly when I actually was able to sit down and read it. I was really impressed, I think, with just how much more developed this entire world, this entire story has grown in just the second book out of 4. And I cannot wait to see how A Reaper at the Gates ends up becoming, because I just fell in love with this story from the very beginning of An Ember in the Ashes, and I'm so willing to see it through to the very end, despite how much I know it's going to break my heart in both The Reaper at the Gates and the last book. And I just cannot wait to see what is in store now for both Elias and Laya together, and then also what is in store now for Helene, since we now get to see her perspective. So if you guys have read this book and An Ember in the Ashes and even A Reaper at the Gates, let me know what your thoughts of A Reaper at the Gates were, with no spoilers, down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, because I'm very excited to hopefully get to it soon. It's gonna have to take a while though, because coming up I'm going to be doing Tome Topple and the biannual Bibliothon, so I might not get to it until the end of July, maybe August, we'll see. But I do have A Reaper at the Gates in my shelf now, so I have it. I know I can get to it at some point, so I'm just really excited to get to it. But anyway, if you guys did enjoy this review, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!